This is the Great Alaska Hunting Podcast. I'm Dalton Gray.
And I'm Ryan Humphreys.
Broadcasting from our hometown of Fairbanks, Alaska. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
$10 years ago, our great nation was born. Now we celebrate with a limited edition juice strawberry lemonade. That's the note or whatever on this limited edition Monster energy drink. It's a Monster juice strawberry lemonade, as it says there. I saw this in the store yesterday. Buy two, get one free. And I bought it because, well, look at this design. Look at this. I mean, it's amazing. If you can't see, if you're listening, well, I'll describe it for you. But we've got an eagle wearing a ball cap and sunglasses and a monster truck and motorcycles and Uncle Sam floating in a pool. And anyway, it's amazing. And, it's red, white, and blue. Fireworks everywhere. And the Monster has another one with an American flag on it. It's sugar-free. I don't really like sugar-free energy drinks. But this marketing worked for me because I consider myself fairly fiercely patriotic, and I'm a big Red Bull fan. It's usually what I drink, but Red Bull doesn't have a USA edition, summer edition that's red, white, and blue, or red, or white, or blue. It's yellow, has nothing to do, no theme whatsoever to celebrate the United States of America. So I like this one, and it tastes good, and this is probably what I'll drink for the summer. Anyhow, that said, today I wanted to get into an idea that I've had. I've often thought for a while, for years now, that if I had my own podcast, my own solo talking head podcast, that I would do some kind of written monologue, which is not what I have here today, but where I would have an idea about something that I wanted to convey. And if I did my own podcast, it probably wouldn't be, a hunting-specific show. It would probably be, it might be political. I don't know. I don't think it's something I'll ever do more than limited edition episodes like this one, because Dalton's out of town and I'm solo. So here we go. There is something that I'm going to make the connection today. Let's put it that way. I'm going to make the connection between this Red Bull can, this American Eagle Screaming Red Bull can, and this bear skull, okay, or just about any bear skull. There's a connection between them, and I'm going to make that today. Very recently on the internet, and in places I try to keep up with some politics. I've mentioned before that if you want to see my unhinged takes to get on X, and sometimes I get on there and make unhinged takes, and sometimes I don't. And anyhow, there's been something that I've seen going around and I've heard talked about recently. Our news cycle moves far too fast to get a handle on what's really going on. But there's this statement that's been made that white people don't have a culture, or that or that Americans don't really have a culture, that everything in America's so young that the culture of America, either they would make the argument that it's not white culture because we are, because we have so many different people from so many different countries that have come here, or that we don't have a culture because we're too young and all the culture that we have is really just stolen from other places, or something along those lines. And I do not want to get into partisan politics at all in this podcast at all, ever really. It's unless it is specifically addressing hunting issues or something like that, which I don't really think should be partisan. But I don't think the statement, somebody saying that white people don't have culture, or that Americans don't have culture, is really a truly partisan issue. Obviously, there's American culture. That's a very easy thing. I mean, this Monster can is a great display of it. The fact that I am wearing a baseball hat, sunglasses, expensive, not just sunglasses for functionality, and admittedly they function amazingly, but they're expensive sunglasses because in America, your sunglasses say something about you. Whether people pay attention to it or not, it is part of our culture. A flannel shirt with rolled up sleeves, that's a distinctly American thing. But hearkening back to the white culture thing, the white people don't have a culture, and there's lots of arguments, and I don't mean to make this a race-based thing for sure, but to make this argument, I want to say, obviously there's hunters of every color, there's people who hunt, but in America, primarily the hunting community is Caucasian, and there's of course hunters of all ethnicities in the U.S., and that's one of the great things about America is that it doesn't matter what you are, what class you are, you have the opportunity to hunt, and that's kind of where I wanted to start drawing a line from this, right? It's 250th year, 12 score and 10 years. American, 1 month from today is the American, from when I'm recording this, is the 250th birthday of our great nation, the greatest nation on earth. And there is a distinctly American culture, white culture thing, and that is not just hunting. Of course, the argument would be that, well, everybody's hunted, to provide for themselves, but we don't really hunt to provide for ourselves today, especially in America. We hunt for sport, and sure, there are those who hunt say, oh yeah, and my dad would even argue with me on that because of course he wants to hunt moose and caribou and whatnot to provide good, game meat for the family, but that's not needed. That's not necessary today. Of course, it's healthier meat. It's better for you. There's things that are about it. It tastes better, but really, that's not what it's about. It's about getting out. Maybe it's for somebody, it's being one with nature. Maybe it's the chase. Maybe it's all of the above, making that harvest. But it is getting out and enjoying the nature we have in America, specifically for me, Alaska, which we have vast swaths of untamed land here. And it's getting out and just being, being one with nature, the harvest, whatever it is for you, or if it's all of the above. And the reason we have that today in the year 2026 is because of American conservation. It's because we realized for most animals in this country before it was too late that if we wanted to be able to remain, to have the ability to continue to hunt, we had to have regulations on hunting. How many animals could a person kill in an area? And that would change based upon how many people hunted there or what the population of the animals was. And we're really good at it now. And obviously I live in Alaska and we have a great fish and game agency, and obviously everybody has their problems with everything, but we have, I would argue, one of the best game management agencies. And of course I have my arguments and things they think they need to change, but they do a pretty good job overall. And, conservation allows for the fact that I can still go hunt moose. And of course, Alaska is a great state. You'd say, well, Alaska's so big, maybe you would still have the opportunity to hunt there, even if everything had been wiped out everywhere else. Which I don't think that's true. I think if everything had been wiped out everywhere else, everybody would just come up here and wiped it all out. There's a great example of that in Unit 20B, which I live in, and Fairbanks lands right in the middle of. They for several years in a row gave out antlerless moose hunts. For where you could kill a cow or a bull moose after shed season, and kill indiscriminately. And the population of moose where I live dropped significantly. I mean, it absolutely plunged downward, and I think they killed something like 2,000 cows, as in female calf-bearing cows one winter, and that caused this. Where when I was growing up, my dad would kill a moose every year, and he would do it by road hunting, by driving around, walking back, neighborhoods that were back on the edge, getting it, maybe riding a trail in and walking fields, and bow hunting and finding moose. If it was on private property, go talk to the owner and get a chance to shoot it. But he would kill a bull moose every year and provide meat for the family that way. And now that's that's almost not possible. There's still people that are able to get a moose by doing that, but it's much, much harder. Much more time has to be dedicated to it, and the success rate is far, far lower. Of course, now there's moose hunting in other parts of the state that is about as what it was back then, and that was probably 15 years ago. But that's just an example of a little example of poor conservation, perhaps on the part of that biologist at that time. But not really here today to talk about moose or caribou or sheep, all things we've talked about on this podcast. Of course, the biggest problem that people have with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game is the management of the 40-mile herd, because everybody thinks they could manage it better. I mean, I don't know if I know a single soul who except for maybe myself and maybe a few people who doesn't think that they could do a better job managing the 40-mile herd than Fish and Game does. And I'm sure some people have some good ideas, but the truth of the matter is we get what we get. And like I said, I'm not here to talk about that today. I'm here to talk about the connection between this Juice Monster, Strawberry Lemonade, USA, Screaming Eagle, and this bear skull. And the first line I'm drawing is American white culture from from this can to conservation, because you had Theodore Roosevelt, obviously, and you had the great white hunters, of whom one was Theodore Roosevelt, in Africa, and around the world, Jim Corbett in India, and you had and many, many more names, most of whom were early on were English, and many American as well, that you could say conquered, that would go on these great hunts. Winston Churchill, while not necessarily known for it, went on hunts, hunts in Africa, old style safari hunts with the legendary guide Percival. Anyhow, so conservation, hunting, and of course many of those men did not even at the time see, of course Theodore Roosevelt did, but did not at the time see what needed to happen, or if they did, they kind of didn't see the answer to it. They just said, well, these times are going away because we're killing all the game. And they didn't necessarily see the answer to it. Of course, Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, of course, his name comes from the story of not wanting to shoot a tied up bear, which really kind of ties into everything that I wanted to talk about today. So my first line I'm going to draw, which I don't have a blackboard or anything, it'd be great, but is from the Monster Can, is to conservation. Okay, we're going to go from USA, American spirit, fireworks, 4th of July, to conservation. And of course, it's not just an American thing, although it fairly distinctly is. 20th century conservation is very distinctly American. And then you go from there, and the next step is what exactly is conservation? And some people talk about conservation is just letting, some people's ideas, I should say, of conservation is just letting the wild be the wild, not having a big impact on it, perhaps having a national park and never hardly entering it, maybe walking through like a little through hiker with your 10-pound or 20-pound, I guess 20 pounds probably isn't considered ultralight backpacker, but your ultralight backpacker or your nature hikers who go through, they leave no trace, and they don't even have really a trail, and they hike through and they can view nature and whatever. And that's the most impact that maybe we should make. That would be somebody's opinion of conservation, right? Let the predators be the predators, let the prey be the prey. However, that was not the point of conservation. In fact, when that wasn't even an idea hardly at all during conservation originally. It was not a popular idea within the U.S. because the reason conservation was needed wasn't really because people were hunting for sport too much, although that happened. It had a lot more to do with market hunting, right? Market hunting for whitetail, for bucks, for hides, right? The reason we call part of the reason, I don't remember the exact, it's in a book by Meat Eater, but there's a part of the reason we call $1 a buck has to do with the value of a buckskin, and hunting black bears for the grease that you could harvest from the fat, and hunting buffalo for their hides. hunting and trapping beaver for their hides, because and it wasn't just for their hides, it was for the underfur on the beaver that they would make felt out of to make felt hats. And so, you basically areas were getting trapped out, areas were getting shot out of deer, black bears were getting shot out. And of course, then we had, and another reason that we needed conservation was because you would come into areas, and what we would do, because the ultimate goal at the time, and I think as a people we should move back towards this, and I think in some ways we are, but it should be on human flourishing. It should be about what's best for humans to live. And so people would move into an area, the cattlemen, livestock, and in the West, they would build ranches and stuff, and there was problems with wolves, and there was problems with mountain lions. And so what would they do? They would kill them all. They would put bounties on their heads to get rid of them because they were killing their livestock. And, well, that, you say, oh, it hurt the bottom line. Well, it didn't just hurt the bottom line. Sometimes it was the difference between, surviving or failing completely, especially if you're talking about a small farmer with a milk cow or one ox to plow the field or whatever it was. And so they did what made sense to them, which is, we're the new predator on the landscape. So we're going to kill all the predators that are here, and then we'll hunt the elk and the deer, right? And as a result, well, there's areas of the states that hardly have any wolves and don't really have any grizzly bears, and very few black bears. Of course, black bears were hunted more for the fact that they were a valuable resource for the skin and for the fat. But you have multiple reasons, and of course, sport hunting for things as well. But there's a lot of reasons why animals started to disappear off the landscape in North America. And not completely disappear, but disappear from areas. And of course, now we come to my great state, the state that I've grown up in and I love, in Alaska here. And we still have all our animals. We haven't lost any because we're too big. It costs too much. And since the state has really been settled and developed, there have been conservation regulations, and the purpose of the conservation regulations is not for the benefit of the animals, it's for the benefit of us. We're not maintaining the 40-mile herd for the sake of the caribou. We're maintaining the 40-mile caribou herd for the sake of us to be able to hunt it, so that year after year, every Alaskan has the opportunity to go kill a caribou quite easily and quickly, hopefully, near the road system on the 40-mile hunt. It's one of the easiest caribou hunts there is. Of course, we talk about it, we make jokes about it, because of the number of people that run up there, and I have had bullets fly my direction because people weren't paying attention, or I was cutting up a dead caribou and all they saw was a caribou, threw up their rifle and fired without thinking. And it's insane for me to even say that, because I would never do what they did, but that's the way people act on that hunt. But the idea, or have acted, it's gotten a little bit better from some of what I've heard and seen, but it has been bad at times. And of course, anywhere you have people, you're going to have problems. But the reason we conserve in this state, and of course across the rest of the U.S., where you've seen the rebounding deer populations, and you've got rebounding bear populations, rebounding elk populations, and now you're bringing wolf populations in. And of course, there's a hot button topic right there, is wolves in the states, right, where they've brought wolves back. And I'm not against that. Of course, I don't live somewhere where that affects me, and so I'm not here to make a definitive statement of whether it's right or wrong. I don't feel like I'm against that. I think it's a good idea, but the problem is we always overcorrect, right? Both, of course, politically but I don't, like I said, I don't want to get into the partisan politics. So with wolves, there's a great example there. We went in, wolves were a problem, and so we overcorrected. We killed all the wolves. All right. Maybe we should have kept a few of those on the landscape. Maybe that wasn't such a great idea. Maybe we should have killed 90% of them. But no, we killed them all. And so, okay, some years later, we decide, okay, we should have some wolves. Wolves helped manage the deer and the elk and things like that. Maybe we need to bring some wolves back in. And so we bring some wolves back in. But then we don't let the ranchers shoot them for almost any reason. Even some places, you're not supposed to shoot them, even if they are currently actively attacking the livestock. And then even when they do get to a manageable population that we could allow hunting, We don't. We just let them grow. We let the populations grow until they're so big that they're almost impossible to manage because, specifically with wolves are a very hard animal to hunt. Wolves are extremely smart and they have good senses. And so they're not an easy animal just to go out there and kill a bunch of. In Alaska, the wolf population was hit pretty hard by Frank Glasser, I believe his name is. I have not read Alaska's Wolf Man. I have another book about Alaska's wolves by Jim Reardon on my shelf. I know I'm Alaskan. I hunt. I should read that book, but I haven't. But he, I know that he came up here and he poisoned wolves. He hunted them and he shot them and working for, I believe, for the federal government, for the state of Alaska to do that. Because even then we thought we needed to get rid of some of the wolves in the landscape. Why? Well, because humans were entering the landscape. Humans were to hunt. So we don't conserve to have a pristine wilderness that's just going to be what nature's going to be without us. We conserve as conservationists to have the resource there for us, for our children, and for future generations. And the idea that, I think the idea that just let nature be nature is crazy, right? But anyhow, so we've drawn a line. We've gone from America 250, red, white, and blue, USA, woohoo, to conservation. And conservation, not just for conservation's sake, but for our use, for the use of people, so that for future generations we'll be able to hunt these populations. And of course, Alaska is my favorite example, not just because I live here, but because we never got to a point where we needed to really pull back too much. We just had to start implementing regulations. And of course, because of expansion of population centers and because of popularity of hunting, and sure, there's areas where we've killed a little bit too much of something. I cited moose where I live. Of course, some people would say, well, 40-mile caribou herd a few years ago. Sheep in certain areas have been perhaps overhunted, but almost none of them, the population's really hurting so bad that they're unhuntable. Of course, there's caribou populations like that, but caribou populations are extremely cyclical, and the fact that we can manage them as well as we have, and like the 40-mile herd in many areas of the state, is an example of the fact that we are figuring this out. Because caribou herds are cyclical. They swing wildly from hundreds of thousands of caribou to maybe a few thousand, and then it'll grow back up over whatever period of time that it is. Of course, I personally believe sheep are cyclical too, and that we're on a low end, and we'll see a rise, and probably and that changes from range to range, area to area. Of course, another small example: I have seen a lot of cottontails, or rabbits, or cottontail, or not. They're not cottontails. Sorry, they're snowshoe hares that we have up here. I've seen a lot of snowshoe hares this year. I didn't see any last year. I haven't seen any for a few years, but I saw a bunch this year. And whatever the rate, whatever the cycle is, they're back up. And you know what that means is this year and next year, at least where I've been seeing those snowshoe hares, the trapping for predators is going to be really good because the predator numbers will be up. Everything in nature is cyclical. And what do? We come in and we say, okay, well, we don't just want to be able to hunt, caribou while the herd is high. We want to even that out so that it's not like this, it's like this. And so we can always have caribou to hunt. And maybe when the caribou numbers are higher, we can kill more. But when they're lower, we'll still be able to kill one, per family or per hunter. And, with that is the need, for them to manage surveys, which of course people want to hunt for meat. It's a requirement in the state, within any state, that when you harvest an animal, you're supposed to harvest the meat. That's the whole point of it. They don't care if you harness the antlers. They don't really care if you harness the hide, but you're supposed to harvest the meat. That's what it's there. That's what you're there for. That's really what you're hunting for. Of course, it's so much more than that. If it was just the meat, well, I don't know that one of us would put forth the effort to hunt, because you can pay extra money for high quality meat at the store or at a specialty store or for your local farmer or rancher. But you don't get the experience of going out there and the hunt and the chase and the harvest. Of course, it costs much more money, right? We sit there and say, oh, we do this because beef is expensive. And say, yeah, right. This is because beef is expensive. So we've gone from the monster, from America, from red, white, and blue, conservation, to conservation for human use. And now I talked about the fact that, years ago, predators have been hunted to almost, to extinction in areas, or almost to extinction, and now they're reintroducing them. Of course, wolves, of course, and of course, grizzlies weren't hunted to extinction in the States, but they're pretty much hunted out of areas, and of course now they're starting to expand back out again, open back up, and now they should open for hunting once again. We're correct, and they haven't. But in the state of Alaska and other states, but I'm going to talk about the state of Alaska because that's what I know. We have a practice that's been around for a long time. My dad's been doing it pretty much since he moved to the state, and that is bear baiting. And baiting bears is a highly controversial subject. Once again, I don't know if it's quite as controversial as whether or not we should reintroduce wolves, but it is extremely controversial. And it's controversial because people don't, from both hunters and non-hunters, because from the perspective of the hunter, we're going out there and we're from a hunter who has not put in the effort to bait himself. And notice I said put in the effort to bait for himself. From his perspective, from maybe a hunter that hunts bears in a spot and stock, in a road hunt or whatever method, even with hounds. But he won't do it with bait over bait. And of course, there's people that don't like the hunting bears with hounds either. And perhaps I'll address that a little bit, although I've never done it. But they don't like hunting bears over bait because they think it's not fair chase, right? And of course, the purpose of conservation isn't really about fair chase. Of course, we use fair chase as one of the means of management and to experience the chase. Because of course, if you had a high-powered laser beam and you could fly over with an airplane and beam down, shoot, get your animal, land next to it and harvest it, well, there's no fair chase there. And of course, if everybody could do that, well, there wouldn't be any animals on the landscape. Or the point of there's a balance between what's most ethical for us, what's most ethical for the animal, of course, a quick, clean kill, and what gives the animal the most chance, and all of that. And I'm not really to get into that, but with bear baiting, of course, I have on my phone pulled up here an article, and this is, like I said, I would love to do this in a pure monologue where I've written what I'm going to say ahead of time, but I didn't have time for that. So here we go. This is Ted Williams. He's a longtime hunter, conservationist. He was manager of DNR, or even Fish and Wildlife in a state for a while, and anyhow, he has some creds, but he's anti-bear baiting, and he has an article on Substack called Garbaging for Bears. And of course, the name invokes whatever. But he says in this article, he mentions some things. There's a lot of arguments he makes in here, and I don't really think the article is very well written. It doesn't really, have a premise, and he doesn't really come to an objective goal. Honestly, I don't think there's a lot of things that he doesn't address both sides of. He does in some ways, but I don't really think he addresses things like he should. And he quotes a lot of people, and one of the things he quotes is, in order for wildlife biologists to manage bears, there needs to be a way to hunt them to attain appropriate harvest rates. That is instructed. That's from Jim Zumbo in a piece entitled "Bear Baiting Basics" for Caribou Gear's website. Okay, and then here's another quote that he quotes within this article. Bernie Behringer from Bear Hunting Magazine: "The odds of killing a bear without bait in central Canada or Minnesota or Wisconsin and Michigan," and I would add Alaska to that list, but are so low that no DNR would consider a bear season without bait as a viable bear management tool. And of course, you're saying bear management. Why are we talking about bear management? Well, it comes down to, it's back to conservation. And the whole idea of managing bears is less for us to be able to, of course, for our children to kill bears and their children to kill bears. And it is more when you need to manage the bear population, because the bear is another predator on the landscape. Now, when you say the ultimate predator is, of course, a human. We have we have reasoning and the ability to build things, and of course we've built amazing things. You jump on a truck and you drive to where you're going to go, and you jump on a four-wheeler and you drive where you're going to go, and then you walk from there carrying specialty gear to help you survive, because we're not equipped to just lay down under a tree and survive very well. And then you pull out your high-powered rifle and you shoot your animal at 400 yards or closer, or 200 yards or whatever it is, but still 200 yards. Well, whereas any animal to hunt and to kill has to close the distance within, well, zero, to no distance, so they can destroy with claws and teeth. And we're a predator in the landscape. We hunt, we conserve so that we can hunt caribou, moose, deer, even in Alaska, down southeast, deer. And there's predators in the landscape that also hunt those things. Wolves and bears, primarily in Alaska. Of course, coyotes to some extent. And, all this talk about sheep populations in Alaska, highs and lows. And, of course, what has a huge effect on sheep populations is wolves, and at least in certain areas. And part of the reason I think we had booming sheep populations at times that we did, that we may never see again, is because of some of the things that were done, or in the 50s and 60s, going out and poisoning carcasses and killing, who knows how many wolves, an indiscriminate number of wolves, just by poisoning a kill that they had made, so that, and so you do that, you kill enough wolves, well, then the populations are going to boom for a little while. And I'm not advocating for doing that again. I do think that we should have some stronger wolf management measures. The fact that I cannot shoot a wolf over my bait if I have artificial lures there, I think is a hogwash, and a foolish and an absolutely ridiculous rule. We need to kill wolves in this state. Wolves kill moose, wolves kill caribou, and wolves kill sheep. And if we cannot manage the rest of the predator population, us being a predator ourselves, there will not be enough for everybody to go around. And of course, we don't want to get rid of wolves off the landscape. We don't want to get rid of bears off the landscape. I enjoy eating black bear. I think black bear is one of the best meats in the state. Grizzly bear depends on the time of year and where it was shot and what it's been eating up to that point in the last, however many period of months, to know if that meat is going to be worth eating or not. But you kill a grizzly bear and you're saving countless numbers of moose over the next coming years, and potentially caribou. And of course, the same is true if you kill a wolf. So the idea of baiting grizzly bears being unethical, from that standpoint alone, is of course ridiculous, because your point isn't, for fair chase. Your point is that you're managing the predators on the landscape. Of course, it's harder to hunt predators because a predator is much more likely to sense that it's being hunted itself, because it is in itself a hunter. So it knows what another hunter potentially is doing. Of course, they don't hunt from tree stands, and that fools them a lot of times. But of course, Ted Williams makes an argument in here that in places where they've banned bear baiting, that more hunters than were previously out hunting bears through other means then go out and do it, because of course the ones that were baiting bears they don't have another way to hunt bears. They can't bait bears, so they're going to go find another way to do it because they love to bear hunt. However, he does not, and I do not see any actual numbers about how many bears were killed over bait versus how many bears were killed otherwise, and in those areas. And like I said, I don't have all of this completely written out for exact quotes and numbers, although I am reading from it. But he does say in here, he quotes Matt Smythe in Free Range American: "Animal rights organizations and anti-hunters say it's unethical, gives hunters an unfair advantage, and doesn't follow the North American model of wildlife conservation." Now, of course, have just now made my case on why it does, because the point of wildlife conservation is not just for fair chase. It's not just for the sake of the animal. It's not for the sake of the animal at all. It is for us. And if we're going to manage the cervid populations, which we consume, we need to manage the other predators as well, so that there is enough of the cervid populations for us to consume. That's part of, of course, the state of Alaska has an extremely, and I mentioned this in the last episode, has an extremely controversial program called intensive management for predators, where they hunt predators. Specifically, in this case that they're doing right now for the Milchatna caribou herd, is they're specifically hunting bears out of helicopter, shooting them out of trees, and they're doing it specifically in the calving grounds of this caribou herd that is in dire need of predator management because it is down to a few thousand caribou, and they're killing about 100 bears a year this way. And of course, people argue, well, you just got to get hunters out there. And well, there's nobody's doing it. You can kill 2 grizzly bears out there as a hunter. Why am I not out there hunting grizzly bears? There's lots of them. Well, because I can't afford to. Especially when I can hunt grizzly bears in many other places in the state that are much easier access. Of course, if I could afford to, then I would happily go do it. But it's not a viable option for me to do. So therefore, something else must be done for predator management. Now, in the areas where I can have a say where it's at, have you ever tried to spot and stalk a bear in a heavily timbered area? I mean, of course, it's not that it's 100% impossible, but it virtually is if you only have weekends to hunt. So my case for bear baiting, in this my next case for bear baiting, not just that it helps with management, but that it allows a hunter like myself who does not have the ability or can afford to just take weeks off or even 10 days off in the spring to go do some spot and stalk bear hunt somewhere, but would like, of course, I like black bear meat, so it's part of filling the freezer, but would like to go bear hunt, help manage the bear population, but to do so weekend warrior style, where I can get off of work on Friday, load everything up, and go put my baits out on a Saturday. And then I can literally, depending on where my baits are at and how far out of town, I can check my baits on a weeknight if I need to. And then I can hunt my baits on a weeknight. And I do not have to take time off of work to hunt. Of course, not everybody can do that, but that most people can if it's something they want to do. And now, bear baiting within my local area is not extremely controversial. Of course, there's those that don't like it. But the most controversial thing about it is the fact, I guess to finish my last argument there, was that it allows me to get out there and hunt otherwise in a way that I otherwise wouldn't be able to get out and help manage population. As a result of that, in this area, you almost never hear of problem bears at all, because one of the arguments against it is that you're feeding the bears. And if one of the arguments Ted Williams makes in his Substack article here, is that if you feed bears to take pictures of them, well, that's a crime. That's a federal crime if you do it on federal land. However, if you feed bears to shoot them, well, then that's okay. In a lot of these areas, it's like 12 states that you're allowed to do it in. Of course, most of the state of Alaska being one of those at certain times of year. However, the perceived effect of feeding the bears outside of town, just outside of town or wherever the baits, drawn. I have put in baits very close to town and had bears on them. That means the bears were already there, by the way. It doesn't mean the bears are coming miles and miles and miles in. It means they were within the area, they smelled it, and they came to the bait. There's a lot of misnomers like that kind of thing he kind of presents in here as if that's something that's consistently happening, where it's just drawing bears to areas where the bears wouldn't have otherwise been, and that's just not really true. Of course, bears have a natural inclination to stay away from population somewhat. At least they do if they're hunted regularly. And in this case, in my area, because bears are hunted a lot over bait, you almost never hear of a problem bear. And if you do, it's because it's a young bear. It got kicked off very early. Many times they're sick, and so they've lost any reason to means of like harvesting food for themselves in the wild. So they've found their way and they're getting into garbage and stuff like that. And of course, by his article name, Garbaging for Bears, it gets that impression that you're hunting over garbage for bears, which really isn't the case most of the time. And of course, that garbage is being like, old rotten food. Which I really don't know that many people that do that anymore. It used to be a lot more accessible to get a hold of that stuff, and it's not as much, at least here, as it was. Anyhow, the next thing I would say, I guess, is the spirit of fair chase. There's no fair chase if there's no chase. Now, I posted a video, I guess it was a week and a half ago, and it was, I don't remember exactly what it was titled, but it was on the YouTube channel. You could be watching this on the YouTube channel. You might be watching this on the podcast. Make sure to check that out, by the way. If you like what I've had to say so far, make sure to check out the Great Alaska Hunting Podcast. This is an episode of that. It's on YouTube. And if you're listening to this, you're hearing me say this right now on Spotify and Apple, but this is on Spotify and Apple. And this isn't just a YouTube channel. Let me put it that way. And make sure you check out the podcast and share it with a friend. Anyhow, on the fair chase idea, of course, I like I said, it fits the North American model of wildlife conservation. But to fair chase, the idea of fair chase is, of course, is that you're taking an appropriate amount of time. You're putting an appropriate amount of limits on yourself to finding an animal, finding the right animal, and harvesting it. One thing that what's his name? Ted Williams says in this article is that most hunters cannot tell the difference between a grizzly bear and a black bear, which is nonsense. It's fairly simple. Once in a while, there is of course, and in the state of Alaska, it's not really a big deal. A lot of places you can hunt them both, and you should be able to. But, of course, he's talking about areas where there's not a lot of grizzly bears, or maybe they don't want you to hunt grizzly bears, or they want you to hunt black bears. Now, of course, your classic black bear is, black, right? Now, this is a black bear, and it's a color phase black bear. But, of course, the shape of the animal, the size of the claws, there's several things that make it fairly easy to tell fairly quickly whether a bear is a black bear or not, just from a picture of it. And any hunter with any amount of education could tell that. So I have that's another one of my contentions with this article, is he basically discounts bear baiters as being stupid hunters who don't have the ability to get out and find bears otherwise. And of course, I've made my case why. maybe one of the reasons is they don't have time to take off work, but baiting takes unfair advantage of survival strategies in the life cycle of black bear. But it's not about, fair chase isn't about, it says unfair strategies unfair advantage of the survival strategy, but baiting bears isn't about the bears. Really, baiting bears is about the cervids so that we have them for ourselves. So it's a management tool. So on the fair chase, which I keep saying, on the fair chase argument, I posted that video. And in that video of putting out my bear baits, and in fact, it's the thumbnail picture on YouTube. Of course, if you listen to the podcast, and if you've not checked out the YouTube channel, there is more there than just podcast episodes now. I've been posting regular videos at least once every 2 weeks now for a few weeks, and I want to maintain that and a little bit more if I have time of me getting out and doing what I do, putting out bear baits, checking bear baits, and going camping, things like that, hiking, camping with my family. But I put that video out, and in that video, I was what I planned on being maybe a 4 or 5, 6 hour afternoon of loading everything up, getting out, putting in my baits, turned into me getting to the parking lot for my first bear bait, my trailer breaking down on me, the axle, the hub fell off the axle, and the bearings had disintegrated from the drive from my house to there, and ended up having to do all kinds of work just to get everything home, right? I didn't get home till I think almost 1 o'clock that night, when I should have been home at say 6 or 7. And that, of course, is an extreme example. But both of these baits were places that I had already baited previously, one of which I've killed bears over, the other one which I'd only baited for a short amount of time to see if there were bears in the area, and I had bears to show up. But both of these baits, one of which I have baited for, this is the 4th year. And I baited the first year I bear baited it, I had to put in a trail. Now that trail is a mile long, and I didn't cut a bunch of living trees and stuff like that. It was a lot of deadfall and burned area, and so I had to put in a lot of work in finding a ways through it for minimal cut work. I mean, I have hours and hours and hours and days just into getting that trail good enough to make it consistent so I could ride to the bait without having to stop and pull stuff out of the trail and find another spot to get through a creek or something like that. And I put a tremendous the amount of effort put into that was over the last 4 years has been, days of effort. And then that year I baited that bait. I baited it up, I scented it up, and I put scent trails in, all this stuff. And I checked it weekly. Every week I drove out there. I spent however much money on gas and the time to get out there to check it, to ride my wheeler to it, to check the bait. And I did not have bears hit that bait until the very, very end of the season, and I was not able to hunt them. That was the first year I put that bear bait in. The second year, I got in there, cleared the trail a little bit, set up the bait, scented it up good, maybe ran some scent trails, came back. I had bears on it very, very quickly that year, and I killed 2 very nice bears over it that year. That was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. 2 years ago, I guess. The next year was last year. I baited it up. Same thing. I got in there. The trail, it's to me, it's somewhat established now. It's been there for 2 years. I get in there. I bait it up. I do the same thing. Scent, everything. Nothing comes in. Nothing shows up. All year long, nothing hit that bear bait last year. I ended up having to scrape the moldy dog food out of the bottom of the hole and clean everything up, and nothing hit that bait that year. Nothing at all. I decided to bait it one more year. I killed a monster 7-foot plus black bear off of that bait, and I'm not willing to give up on it that easily. So I'm baiting it another year this year. Now I baited it 3 weeks ago now, and 2 weeks later I got out there and checked it, and most of the dog food had been eaten by ravens and crows, and there was no bears had hit it yet, which I videoed getting out there and checking the baits as well, and that'll probably be some form of video that I put up at some point. And I have another, and then the other spot that I checked last year, baited up, had a bear hit. I also had baited up after recovering the trailer and the 4-wheeler and everything and getting out. I finally just got in there, checked the bait, or got in there, set the bait up. 2 weeks later, once again, I got in there. Nothing had hit it, not touched at all. Which is discouraging, after last year not having anything hit that bait. There's another bear bait that I put in that years previous, Dalton and I had baited and had covered in grizzlies, and where it was, we couldn't shoot grizzlies at the time, but now we can. And so I had talked to my sister, a different sister than Tabitha, a different one, and said, hey, would you like to do this bait with me? You register it, and then I'll get in there and help you set it up and everything. I think it would be cool to do. I think it would be worth it, and you might have a chance to kill a grizzly bear. Now, this is a bear bait where we probably had 10 grizzly bears hitting the bait at the same time, at least, and 10 adult grizzly bears. One of which was every bit of 7.5 or 8 feet. Monsters. Big bears. And this last year, we baited that all year, scented it up really well. Nothing hit it. Now, it was a weird year last year. I don't know why. It seemed to be that I had experience with 2 baits. But my point is this. I don't know how much money and time I spent on bear baits last year. But it wasn't a little. And the year before, which I killed 2 bears in, which I was grateful for, and the year before, which I didn't kill any bears, and the year before that, which I didn't bear bait at all. I did. I don't remember. And there was another bear bait that I think that first year when I put in that other bait, the first one that I've baited 4 years now, when I put that bait in, I put another bait completely opposite direction of the state, and I put it in, and I had bears hit it, but it was very inconsistent. It was too much competition in the area. Wind wasn't quite right, and things like that. And I baited it, and I fed bears, meaning bears hit. They ate dog food. Anyway, I ended up cleaning it all up and getting it out of there that year. But the whole point of all of that, to say all of that, is the amount of work that went into that bear baiting. And that was bear baiting with a 4-wheeler, right? I'm not hiking in for those. Although in the midst of all of this, I've helped Dalton with his bear baits and done some hike-in stuff and carried 2 35-pound bags of dog food and a jug of grease in one hand and a rifle in the other, right? I'm over, how many pounds that is. It's a lot of weight, and it's not a long distance, but somebody commented, and I'll go read it, and he's quite a consistent supporter of a YouTube channel. He's on here quite a bit, but he said on a comment on that video where the trailer broke down and everything. Where's the comments? He said, when someone says, quotes, "Oh, you hunt bears over bait? That's too easy." And he says, "I just laughed. They have no idea how much work and money actually goes into it. I was finally able to get my bait out this past Saturday and Sunday. It's a late start, but what can you do with Mother Alaska decides to snow on our parade?" And I, of course, agree with that wholeheartedly. And of course, there's just there's also, I've been talking about the anti-baiting side of things, but the idea that baiting is easy is a misnomer, completely wrong. Bear baiting is not easy. Bear baiting is hard. The amount of time and effort and just labor you have to put into it. I had a buddy of mine that I was out riding. It was very, very end of bait season. I wasn't hunting anymore. This was several years ago, a long time ago at this point. And we were just out riding wheelers, and I think he called me. I was like, "Hey, you want to go riding?" Or I don't remember, whatever it was. So we loaded up our wheelers, went and met somewhere that I was familiar with and he hadn't been before, and said, "Hey, let's go out here." And we were out there riding. I said, "Hey, we're out here. I have a bear bait out here. It's end of season. You want to come clean it up with me?" He's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And we went in there, and of course the place this was that grizzly bait, had been absolutely slammed. Absolutely hammered. And we went in there, cleaned everything up. And he looks at me, he goes, "Wow, you had bear, wow, this is like crazy." And I looked later at the cameras on that one, and we had been there. We had pulled up, and when we pulled up with our four-wheelers, we chased the bears away. And I had a rifle with me, because I just usually do in that area. There's a lot of bears out there. Bears ran off when we pulled up with the four-wheeler because I could see the camera. From the time we arrived, there was bears on that bait minutes before. And that bait had been dry, meaning no bear bait had been there for a month. That's how many bears were there, but it wasn't huntable because it was grizzly bears at the time. And he said to me, "Man, you've got bears here." And of course he was like, I said, "You can bait this." I told him, "You can bait this. Like, you can't really, I haven't had any luck here for black bears." But he was blown away because he had tried to bear bears a year or two in times previous and had not a lot of success. And he gave up. A lot of people give up bear baiting before the end of June because nothing's hitting. They're getting out. They want to go fishing. They want to go camping, all that kind of stuff. And they give up. And, well, a lot of times the hottest time of season is that end of June, after mating season is over, because mating season kicks in. And my whole point is people say bear baiting is easy. Well, no, it's not. Bear baiting's not easy. There's nothing about bear baiting that is easy. Of course, once in a while, somebody goes out, sets up their first bait, and kills a bear a few weeks later. Once again, though, that wasn't easy. They put up their first bait. They had to go find a spot, register it. There's a small class you have to take online in the state of Alaska to register a bear bait. There's a lot of work that goes into it. It's not simple. It's not easy. When it comes in, anyhow. So the whole fair chase thing, I think, is almost a moot point because, well, sure, it's not a fair chase from the perspective of the animal. Neither is hunting anything with a rifle. Because, well, you just pull the trigger and it goes boom and the animal falls over. And of course, that's not exactly how it works, though, is it? Because, well, you have to get yourself close enough to the animal to get a shot that you're confident in, right? And you have to wait for the wind to be right, and the wind to be right both for your shot placement and for you not spooking the animal. And you have to have the animal facing the right direction so you can get a good, vital, consistent, ethical shot. And there's a million things that have to line up right that you have to get yourself into. And then because of chance and weather, everything, even if you do everything right, it may not work out for whatever your animal is, caribou, moose, sheep, anything. Bear, of course. And so the idea of fair chase is because it's hard enough, right? You're doing enough work to deserve the animal, I guess. Yet we are not hunting for the sake of the animal. We are hunting for our sake. Of course, it's for the chase. It's for the thrill. And if you don't want to bear bait because you just don't think it's ethical, I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem with you fighting against it. I have a problem with you saying it's not ethical and writing a whole article about it. Now, if you look up Ted Williams is his name. If you look him up, it's going to say something. It says something about how when you look up his opinions on this. Of course, I'm reading his article here. It says it says something about how he has sat bear baits for research. Now, he tells that story in his article, and we're going to get to that here shortly. But he has a quote here. How sporting is it to shoot a bear with its head in a bucket of jelly donuts? That's from another guy named Tom Beck. He ran the black bear program for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And he says, you can predict where they're going to be, and if you're a woodsman, all you have to do is scout those places. After we banned baiting in Colorado, it took only 2 years for hunters to get to the point where they were killing more bears than they were before. Okay, so maybe they were. Well, and probably just has idea that I think that bear hunting was getting more popular. Anyhow, in the Fairbanks area, in Unit 20B and surrounding areas, far fewer bears would get killed, and I guarantee it, because we don't have open area. There's hardly any places you can go sit in glass hillsides for bears. It just they're few and far between, and their access is difficult. Now, if we go towards the end of this article, where is he at here? And I think I've addressed most of his arguments in here. There's some others. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to talk about here is he says bear baiting, especially spring baiting when sows are lactating, and he mentions Alaska, orphans cubs. Cubs depend on mothers. Most orphan cubs succumb to starvation, exposure, predation, and spring bears, still lethargic from hibernation, are even easier targets for bait hunters. In the state of Alaska, it is illegal to shoot a sow with cubs, and there is no easier way to find out if a sow has cubs than to hunt it over a bait. And so the point there is that, for the idea of conservation, if you want to help the bear population, well, then what do? You kill the big boars, because the big boars actually come in and kill cubs, because then that sow will go into heat again if they do that early enough. They'll kill the cubs and sometimes just even eat them. Okay, bears have no discrimination. Lions do the same thing. So if you kill those big boars, well, then that gives that sow the opportunity to defend her cubs, and those cubs a better chance of life. And you have a much better chance of finding a big boar by baiting for that big boar and waiting for that big bear to come in than you do if you just shoot whatever bears you can find spot and stock. Now, of course, there's plenty of hunters that just shoot small bears over bait because that's what they want to shoot. And I'm not advocating against that either. I'm saying the opportunities that that bear baiting provides for the conservation even of black bears, even for black bears' sake, even though I don't believe that's why we do it or why we should do it. And I'm sure it's very controversial. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure this will be loved. But he says, in the last section of the article, he says he calls it his first-hand look at garbage hunting, which is what he calls it. I don't like that classification, of course, but he says he's been scolded by managers and bear baiters for academic method of hunting they say I've never experienced. But I have experienced it. In June 1981, Gray's Sporting Journal, Literate and Beautifully Illustrated Celebration of Fair Chase, for which I still write, sent me to Jackman, Maine to research bear baiting. Maine has since restricted bear baiting to fall. Okay, because he was only armed with a camera, but other clients toted high-powered rifles. I do not like once again, I do not like the imagery there of high-powered rifle. Obviously, we know what that means, but it's used in a way that somebody who is almost anti-hunting would use it. Shotguns, Bowie knives, of course. Bowie knives. It's got to put Bowie knives in there because guys had big knives and big bore handguns. Some had ammo-laden bandoliers draped over their shoulders. All were from out of state. I almost don't even believe that that's true. It might be true. I almost don't believe it. Anyhow, if you want to hunt with an ammo-laden bandolier, it's all yours. Maybe I'll do it just for the imagery for a YouTube video or something, right? Because it would look cool. Anyhow, he has a stupid story about a safety lecture in here that has nothing to do with the rest of the article. Anyhow, so to experience bear baiting, after the safety lecture, his guide, Jack, gives him, he says, to experience bear baiting, I reclined at one of Jack's bait stations for 5 hours and 16 minutes, watching garbage. Of course, he says garbage again. Of course, that garbage is just food that bears like. with George, an 18-year-old hunter from Paoian Springs, Virginia. Besides 75,000 black flies, the only wildlife I ever saw was a red squirrel. George, who only heard it, thought it was a bear for sure. George had saved his money for a dream hunting trip, and all he got to see of the storied Northwoods was a half acre around a bag of rotten meat hanging from a tree 80 feet from a dirt road. Ted Williams, anyhow, and so that's it. That's the end of the article. He says he experienced bear baiting. He hasn't done the work to put out a bear bait. He hasn't done the work to find a spot. And of course, he went to some outfitter that sounds like kind of a knockoff outfitter, in my humble opinion, and just says now I can experience, and I can say I've experienced bear baiting, so now I can advocate against it. And that is completely dishonest. Of course, I'm glad he tells the story, but to tell that, to pretend like he's an experienced baiter, it is, of course, absolutely nonsense. He is no more experienced and no smarter of a person than the supposed people with high-powered rifles, Bowie knives, and bandoliers that he paints as, I guess Hicks is what he's trying to paint a picture of. He's no smarter than they are in that situation. He's the same kind of, he paints them as idiots. And he's coming into that situation in the same way. And I'm not trying to make a personal attack. This article is not well informed. Now, of course, there are things, and I said I didn't see the numbers originally when I skimmed through it about Colorado's information, and clearly, yes, for some reason the numbers did go up for bears harvested after they removed bear baiting, and perhaps that worked well in Colorado, but Colorado has a lot of that we don't. Nice, big, open areas that you can go hunt bears in, spot and stock style, and find them a lot easier. Doesn't exist in this area, hardly at all. If it did, I would be more prone to get out and do it. I would enjoy that a lot, but it just doesn't really exist. And of course, then once again, like I said, time. You're not going to successfully harvest a bear doing that very well by just being able to hunt weekends or evenings. You have to have time, and that's one thing that bear baiting allows. I'm sure if Dalton was here, he'd have more input on this. Of course, this skull is from a bear that Dalton killed over bait. I believe he's told this story on the channel, but there's a broadhead and a hole in the skull that the broadhead went in. Of course, you can hear more about that if you find that episode. And also, he tells the story. If you find the video on the YouTube channel called Bear Baiting Seminar, he tells the story there, although that's just the video isn't made. Video was made in one camera shot for 2-hour seminar. You could skip through it and find it if you want. That I think is the show today. The line from America 250 USA Screaming Eagles, and to bear baiting, and I think it's a fairly clear thing because America. Conservation, very American, and of course I said white culture and all that kind of stuff at the beginning. A very American, a very white heritage thing, and I don't say that in a way. I'm not saying that anti any other race. I'm saying it because they said it doesn't exist. People say it doesn't exist, and I would argue from the wholesome perspective, conservation is one of the greatest cultural achievements of any culture. I visited Europe a few years ago on a missions trip, and as a hunter, I was very interested in asking people about hunting, and they basically said, yeah, we don't really have any animals here because they were all killed by people who needed to eat. And of course, that's not true of all of Europe by any means, but in the area I was, it was. And I think I did see in a cornfield or hayfield or wheat field or something, I did see a roe deer. I'm an Alaskan, lifelong Alaskan, grew up here. I have seen a roe deer, I guess, for what it was in the wild in a farm field. That was cool. I saw a couple of roe deer, something like that. And where I saw the roe deer was in Hungary, near Budapest. Of course, if you go east of there, there's nothing. There's no wildlife left. But anyhow, it's a distinctly American thing. And like I said, philosophically, politically, this is as an American, as well as apple pie, as baseball, as all the things, as pizza. People say, "Oh, pizza is not American." Well, pizza is, of course, distinctly an American thing. It's I'll get into the weeds if I go that route, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that. Of course, yes, pizza as we know today, New York style, Chicago style, whatever. From the hunting perspective, from a culture's perspective, I think one of the last things in America that has that crosses party lines is hunting, is the hunting community. You meet another hunter and you don't really care what his politics are, and there's a lot of popular or a few. I think overall most hunters are lean red, lean conservative, but there's a few who maybe lean fairly the other direction, yet they're popular personalities, on the internet and podcasts and YouTube and everything like that. And some of them I really don't like. What they're not from Alaska maybe, and they come up here and they're advocating for things that I don't really agree with. I do live from a human flourishing perspective, and while I like driving the haul road and seeing the beauty, I also wouldn't have a problem seeing a dozen data centers pop up along that road. I think that would be a great use of the resource that we have up here. A dozen or a few dozen or a few hundred. I think human flourishing, staying a superpower in the world, I think all of those things are much, much more important than, some beautiful landscape from a road somewhere that still will exist across most of the state. And really, if you spent much time on the north slope, north of, 60 miles out of Prudhoe, so 60 miles south of Prudhoe, or so from north of that, if you spent much time on that road up there, there's not really anything to see. Of course, there's some wildlife and stuff, but guess what? Wildlife won't go away if they build a bunch of data centers. They won't. In fact, they'll probably hang out by it in the wintertime because there's some residual heat. There's some heat that will be coming off of it. Caribou hang out under the pipeline for that reason. Of course, I've heard Steve Ranella say, everybody talks about that picture. Caribou are hanging out under the pipeline, and he doesn't like it because it's true. They do. Also, you build something like the pipeline, and because of it existing, you have plants and growth sprout up around it that doesn't sprout up anywhere else because of the heat conduction and however that works. Anyhow, I digress. This has been the Great Alaska Hunting Podcast. Make sure to check out the Great Alaska Hunting Company on YouTube. Check out our website. You can email us or get us on the socials if you have any questions or comments. Of course, you can comment below this if you're watching it on YouTube. There is another YouTube video coming out before too long, hopefully, and much more of that to come, hopefully this summer. Like, subscribe, share it with a friend. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Tread lightly, but don't tread well.